All right, time for another update and forecast for the lake fire. If you're looking for the Shelly fire, I'm going to do that live stream next. I thought it'd be easier to do separate videos throughout the day today just because there's so much to cover. So lake fire, we did have some activity on this yesterday. I almost went live yesterday afternoon when I saw some heat coming off of this southern area of the fire. So we did get some new acreage burned. It's up to over 34,000 acres, but just seeing the number itself doesn't really tell us that much. We actually just want to see where that increase in acreage was. So here we have I forgot to say containment. So 16% containment. We'll look at that in a second too. So here's the lake fire. Let's look at where the growth was yesterday. Just flipping it on and off. Looks like we had a little bit on that northern section again. That was somewhere where we saw heat coming off of it 2 days ago. Surprisingly, not that much on the northeastern side of the fire. It actually looks like most of our new growth, when I flip it on and off right here, you'll be able to see, actually appears to be on the southern edge of the fire, which is, maybe a little bit surprising just based on early yesterday afternoon, we had almost southerly winds. You could tell because the satellite imagery was blowing the smoke to the north. So I was expecting to see more growth on this side of the fire because it'd be in alignment with the winds. Maybe something that kept it down on this side is fires don't really like to move downhill as much as they like to move uphill, because when they're moving uphill, they can preheat the fuels above the flames, evaporate the moisture out, so then by the time the flames get there, then those fuels are ready to burst into flames, whereas downhill, they have to kind of go against that factor. It's almost the same as if you hold a match, like upwards or downwards. It burns your hand a lot faster if you have it tilted up towards your fingers. So that's the growth on this side yesterday. And yeah, you can see how it did start to creep down this hill a little bit there, and looks like it slopped over that, I don't know if that's a trail or a road right there, probably a road. We'll look at some of the actual containment lines in a moment, but that pretty much sums up the fire going into the wilderness right there. But the main area of this fire that we're concerned about is actually the area that's closer to all of these structures. I probably should have given us our bearings real quick. So we have Santa Barbara down here, Santa Ynez Mountains, Santa Maria, and then zooming in here, we have Los Olivos. That's the area that has the largest amount of structures that are close to this fire. So if we zoom in here, let's see what kind of growth we had. This is where a lot of the heat was coming off of the fire yesterday. And yeah, it looks like it did creep down this side right here. And then we also definitely saw some growth right there. So what happens in these situations, it's either just backing down the topography, or sometimes you can get like a little spot like this, and then it's able to rush back up the hill. And that's actually something that's been happening a lot this year, because the fuels are so dry that it's easy for like a little burning ember to ignite the fuels. And then when it aligns with topography, it's able to just rush right back up into the fire. Now, there is some good news on the lake fire though, because if we look at the containment, you might not think that's good news, 16%. That seems like it's still very low. But if we look at the map itself, they've done a lot of good work on this fire. Let's just check out the resources for a second. There are 3,000 personnel, 77 dozers, 28 helicopters. That's one of the largest number of resources I've ever seen on a fire. And in this map, you can see all of the great work that they've done. So this is the lake fire. Where that black line is where they have containment. The red fire perimeter is where it's uncontained. But then it might look a little busy at first, but just try to look at kind of one thing at a time. Key thing that I notice on this map are those little X's right there that are in different lines. Those are the dozer lines that we have. And look how many different ones we have, exactly where we had the most heat coming off of the fire yesterday, and where we have the most amount of structures down to the south. They've put in not only one line between the fire and those structures, but it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it just keeps going around that entire southern edge. So the reason that they would do that is they put in those dozer lines so that when the fire gets to those dozer lines, there's no more fuel, so then it can't just like it can't go through the line if there's no fuel to burn. That dirt is not going to carry flame. But the reason that they put in multiple lines is because sometimes you can get a burning ember that jumps over the line, and then it can start a fire in there. But then if you have another backup line, then the fire doesn't just take off. So yeah, it's good to see that they've put so many lines on that side. And then I also thought it was interesting to see they have a planned hand line up here in the wilderness to try to basically, so that's the Los Padres National Forest. They're basically going to try to stop it there. But yeah, the area of the fire we've been watching the most closely has been the southern edge, because that's where the largest number of structures are. And we can look at the structure numbers here. Looks like 6 structures have been damaged. That's actually, I mean, it's never good to see any structures damaged, but for how large this fire is, and especially considering some of the weather conditions we've had, that number could be a lot higher. 0 structures destroyed is great to see. And although we've had 4 injuries, 0 fatalities. So now let's actually look at where these structures are that I've been talking about. I probably should have shown this first. The ones closest to the fire were on the southern edge, but that's actually, see how close those are right there, the little orange dots. But that's, again, where we've already seen some of the containment up there, and very little activity on that part of the fire. Almost no growth on that part of the fire recently. And then down on this side, that's where I've been keeping a close eye on, because all those orange dots are our structures. All those red dots are where we have had some recent heat. And if we look at fire history, there's no recent fire history in that area. So that's a lot of fuel that hasn't burnt in a very long time. It's also been drying out for not only since summer started, but especially this last week and a half since California has been in a heat wave. The fire itself has been under an excessive heat warning. At one point, we're in a red flag warning. Fuels are about as dry as you're ever going to see this time of the year. And again, they haven't burnt in a very long time. So that's why it's great to see all of those different lines that they put in between where we have some of that heat and where we have those structures. So the other thing we can do on this, I'll try to clean up the map a little bit, is maybe we'll leave in structures. And then let's look at if there's any current heat coming off of the fire. So yeah, it's kind of the 3 main spots that we've been watching the last few days. That northern edge, some heat there. This eastern edge, that red shows decent amount of heat, especially for this time of the day. It's only 9:30 in the morning. And that's one thing that's been happening on this fire, is it's been staying dry overnight. So when the fuels are dried, the fire can keep burning. And then in the lower elevations where we have more of the marine layer, that's where the moisture goes back into the fuels a bit more during the night. So that is one thing working for us if the fire does get closer towards these structures, is the fire weather forecast is actually better the lower in elevation we go, because the marine layer has more of an influence. And then one thing I also should point out, just because you see the heat right there, it doesn't mean that all of that area has now burned. This comes from satellite imagery, and it's not always that accurate, but it does give us a general idea of where we are currently seeing some heat. So I think that sums up like what happened on the fire yesterday and what's happening right now. Now we can go into more of the future, which is the forecast, because that's going to mostly determine what happens this afternoon. So definitely hot again, up in the 90s. This is the forecast for Los Olivos. It does look like we have some stronger wind gusts around 15 to 20 miles per hour in the afternoon, but to be honest, that's not that high of winds, and it actually looks like the winds are less strong tomorrow. The one thing I'd say, the reason temperature is important is because the hotter your air is, the drier, the more moisture it can hold, so the drier your air will be. And that's, I'd say, the biggest concern on this fire is how dry the air is. Actually, there's a lot of concerns. How dry it is, the steep topography, and just the fact that the fuels haven't been burnt out in such a long time. And that was something I was reading in the incident action plan for today. We can actually go through here, read some of the stuff that I highlighted. We won't go through everything. So it says continued hot and dry weather. Notice they don't say windy there though, because you look at the winds westerly, so slightly different direction than yesterday. If you have westerly winds, that's going to kind of try to move the fire, expecting some growth on this eastern side with those westerly winds. But hopefully it just takes this and pushes it back into the fire itself. It's good that the fire and the winds aren't aligning towards our structures. I'd be more worried if we had northerly winds. That would push the fire down directly into our structures or pick up some of those burning embers and throw them over the dozer lines. But westerly winds, we'd prefer southerly, but I mean, we'll take what we can get there. And it's also not that windy. Certainly not as windy as it was earlier this week, and I mean, we got through that. Afternoon highs, 80s to 90s. Dry in the morning, even drier in the afternoon, lowering to 10 to 20%. That's that poor humidity recovery in the overnight hours, which is why at 9:30 in the morning we already have some activity on the fire. Extended forecast, no big changes Friday, but if anything, a few degrees cooler and slightly higher humidity. So there's going to be some moisture moving up from the south this weekend. It actually could create some thunderstorms in other parts of California, which could have some issues there, but I mean, on the lake fire, it might end up actually being a good thing with more cloud cover. It's not going to get as hot. It'll also bring in some moisture that will hopefully help with our fuels. So I'd say the forecast actually looks pretty good for the lake fire Friday, Saturday. Today, still very hot and dry out there. So yeah, definitely expecting significant fire spread and upslope runs as the fire repositions in new drainages or as wind, fuels, and topography come into alignment. I think that's a good sentence to basically summarize it, or summarize what's working against us. In fact, basically the whole fire triangle: fuel, weather, topography today. The one thing that's not as bad as it could be today is the wind. So that's a silver lining, and then the other silver lining is all of the resources that we have on this fire. If we have 3,000 personnel and 77 dozers, and we've seen all the different lines they've been putting in, I'd honestly be surprised if we saw this rush out of control this afternoon. In that aspect, I'm always more afraid of wind. Wind is always a big wild card on wildfires, but it doesn't look like it's going to be too exceptional today. So we'll see some activity this afternoon. There'll be smoke coming off it. There'll be more acres burned, but yeah, I would be surprised if we saw it get past any of those dozer lines that they've been putting in all over the place between the fire and where we have the largest amount of structures. Now, I'm only as good as the information that I have to go off of, so that's just the prediction for right now, and things can change quickly in California during fire season. So I'll continue to watch, and I'll keep you guys updated as new information comes in. So hopefully this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.